Hi guys, this is the first and only episode at the moment for the Memory Alpha podcast, and we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Memory Alpha. Nobody thought that it would be that old by the day, but actually Memory Alpha started in November 2003. And with us on the panel, we have Dan and Harry from USA and the Netherlands, as well as Jan from Northern Germany. I am Florian. I started the German version of Memory Alpha just in, what was it, May 2004. And let's have a little introduction of everyone. We go in alphabetical order, so Dan, Harry, and Jan. And I'd like to ask you 3 questions. And this is, what is your favorite Star Trek series, your favorite Star Trek film? And what is your favorite Star Trek villain or Star Trek Doctor? For me, the series is, I think, Star Trek Discovery. It's a little strange in the later series, later seasons, but... And my favorite Star Trek film is Star Trek Search for Spock. Villain. Soren, Dr. Soren. Because he was fighting against Picard and against Kirk. What about you, Dan?
Hello, I'm Dan. My favorite Star Trek series is probably still my first one, Deep Space Nine. That was the one that got me to fall in love, and I discovered all the others from there. My favorite film, I'd have to say, is First Contact. I love both sides of that story, the Borg on the ship, but also the optimism of First Contact itself and the story of the Phoenix and Cochrane. And favorite villain that's a tough one, but I'll have to stick with Deep Space Nine and say Gul Dukat.
Or you can choose a doctor, maybe.
Yes. A doctor? I'd say if I was going to have a favorite doctor, I would choose Dr. Crusher.
I'm Harry, from the Netherlands, as Florian said. Favorite series? I think I'll keep it old school and say the original series, because that's what started it all. They had the most vision, I think, of all of them, because they thought about Star Trek. Favorite movie? Well, maybe the motion picture as well. I don't think a movie like that could be made today. Like, they went full science fiction with it, and it's a strange movie, maybe, but yeah, I really like it. And then favorite doctor or villain, right?
Yes.
Well, for villain, I think Nero from the 2009 movie was very fun. Just a normal guy with some big problems. Especially when he met Christopher Pike. Hello, Christopher. I thought that was really funny. And favorite doctor has to be McCoy, because, well, he's the Star Trek doctor, I guess.
Yeah, I think then it's my turn. So my favorite Star Trek series is also Deep Space Nine. So that was what kept me on the track, even though I started with TNG. That was some kind of ritual after coming back from school back then to watch it. And favorite Star Trek film, I think it's The Wrath of Khan. So that is exciting. They have the submarine style in there. That was really, really cool to see.
And Spock died.
Yeah, so I watched it much later than in a cinema, of course. It was already clear that he will resurrect next week when the other movie is played. That was when I saw the movie. They even had the 4th one already. And favorite doctor, I think this would be Bashir. Going back to Deep Space Nine, I think it's his excitement, and then the arc that he had from the naive young doctor on his first assignment to I'm out in the frontier, and now everything is completely changed to what was years ago.
Yeah, I already said that I started the German Memory Alpha, and maybe I should add that Jan and me both more or less started the German Memory Alpha back in May 2004. But let's start with our journey on the, memory lane with Dan and Harry. Who started the original, the English Memory Alpha? Is it true that you started it in November 2003, or is it actually even older than this?
As I recall, it wasn't that much sooner than that. It took a little while, but only by a couple of months. Harry, I remember, was the one who posted the idea on the Flare forum. I had just kind of responded with my own background of working on an individual database for myself. And then from there, we just kind of put it together within a couple of months. So it was a relatively short run up to the actual launch. But there was obviously some, excitement and trials, and there was a false start, as I recall, in the meantime, trying different software. But it did come together relatively quickly.
Well, I posted my original idea on the forums, and Dan was working on his own website, and he had the knowledge about hosting and running the software. So we came together via the forum, and then we tried a few different types of wiki. We settled on it being a wiki quite soon, I think. And then in November we invited more people via the forums, I think, and then after a few weeks we really launched officially.
Why did you choose a wiki? Because I think there were things like this, Star Trek encyclopedias or Star Trek databases before. And what was the idea behind the wiki?
Well, for me, back in those days, a lot of people made their own websites, something that doesn't really happen that much anymore. So there were a lot of Star Trek fans that made their websites. One person made a website about starships, one made it about aliens. So everyone had their own little niche. And I also had my own website. And my experience was, it's fun for a few months, and then you lose interest and do something else. And all these great databases were never finished, really. And Wikipedia was about 3 years old, maybe, at the time. So
I had never heard of Wikipedia when you brought that up, so I had to go look that up myself. That's how new it was. Yeah, just a few years old.
So my idea was, if everyone is working in the same database, then if someone loses interest, there's probably someone else who can take over.
Yeah, Dan is actually running his own website, is it?
It's mostly dead, but not all dead. I still update it. I keep putting little things every now and then, a blog post, or I add a few things for reference, but not regularly, just whenever the mood strikes me.
I see. Who came up with the name Memory Alpha?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it's from an episode, right?
Yes, of course. I know the behind the scenes explanation, but you could have chosen any other name.
Yeah, I think it happened quite quickly, quite soon. I mean, early in the process, but
I actually don't have a memory of why we chose that either, to be honest.
No,
but I think
it just felt right, I guess.
Yeah, it's the natural thing that you come up with. I think there have been different memory alphas before, not in the digital sense as we experience it today, but Memory Alpha is just that database name for Star Trek stuff.
And then Harry ordered the domain, or?
For the first couple of months, it was on my website. I just set up a subdomain as we were getting things up and running. And then after that, Harry got the domain name and we moved it onto its own server.
And I think Chris Trigwell made us a logo at that time as well.
Yes.
He also made logos for your website, I think, or your posted his designs.
I'm hosting his designs. He was just posting and sharing on the forums, and I asked, would he like me to make a gallery to put them all together because they were just so well done? And then I asked, hey, could you make one for Memory Alpha? And 20 years later, we're still using it.
And you have the copyrights for it, or am I allowed to reuse the Memory Alpha logo?
I don't see why not. I don't know if there's an official for official ownership for that, to be honest. Yeah, sure. I don't see why not. But then again, I haven't been directly involved in the operation of Memory Alpha for a number of years. We may talk about that later on.
The designer is going by the name Reverend in the Flare format, is it right? Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, he made a lot of good logos. Yeah, totally.
And then, Harry, you ran the website on your server, and I think you even asked for donations in the first few weeks or months. I don't know how long that went on your side.
Yeah, it ran on Dan's server, but yeah, with donations for a while. I seem to remember that we didn't really break even with that. I think it costs more to host back in those days than it does today, and we didn't get that many donations, I think.
At least one.
From you? Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't remember the exact details, but I do remember having a spreadsheet of all the donations. Yeah.
So you lost money on that enterprise.
Yeah, I think some months it worked and some months it didn't. And I think we were both students at the time, at least I was.
I was too.
Yeah, and then the hosting moved. I don't know if you want to go into that now or...
And, I think we moved to Wikicities was the name back then.
I remember even from the very early days, I think we had some discussion, or there was discussion on Wikipedia, like, why isn't this just part of Wikipedia? Why are you making your own thing? Because we have the big encyclopedia. So that was a very brief discussion. And another thing I remember is that I personally, on the very first days, I never really saw it as just canon Star Trek. Just, we might as well describe everything. Mm-hmm. But I think we very quickly decided, no, we just stick to canon, add the animated series, because why not? And then I don't really know when Memory Beta started, but that happened later.
Let's just describe what is canon. So the canon thing is everything which is in the series, in the films, or officially with Star Trek. So it's the lore, so to say, and then there is Memory Beta, which is for all the novels and fan fiction, I think. Is it?
For novels. For fan fiction, there's even another wiki.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Memory Beta is only for licensed material that was published in official channels.
I remember part of that discussion about deciding what was going to be included and what wasn't. And at the time, I remember we were drawing very heavily on resources like the hardback Star Trek Encyclopedia, and trying to find references and to keep it consistent between all the books, because some of us have read certain books but not others, and some haven't read any books. Trying to make it approachable, trying to make Memory Alpha approachable so that everybody could contribute to it. I recall that was something that I think that was kind of why we tried to steer towards the canon side of things. Combining that with creating the narrative consistency of the articles from Memory Alpha, trying to write them out as if they were an actual encyclopedia. It was something where we needed to figure out what are we going to include and what aren't we, because a lot of the novels, I did read novels for a while and they were great, but fitting them into the story of what happened in the episodes themselves was something that would have been really difficult at best. And I suppose part of it was a limitation of the software. because at the time it was just all one giant page, one long page. So we couldn't really have this part is the canon material, this part is the licensed material. Now I know that Wiki software has options for showing like, here's the new canon, here's the old canon, as you know, some of the other fan wikis have, information like that. So that would have been nice to have, but it didn't exist at the time.
And what draw you to the conclusion to also include the animated series? It's absent in the official encyclopedia. That was, I think, controversial at that time, right?
It was at the time, and I remember thinking I hadn't even seen it because it was hard to get. I don't even remember when it had come out on DVDs, but it hadn't come out or I hadn't had the money to buy it. But I figured it's a TV show. It's about Star Trek, and they did have all those little sparse references to the show. So I figured, let's include it. And because of the wiki format, we can remove it later on if we decide we don't want to. But I suppose in its own way, the fact of including it then kind of led to its rehabilitation. Maybe just a small part of that, but I know that as time went on, it was embraced more and more by the powers that be.
Is the animated series in the official the print encyclopedia today, or still not?
I don't know about the last edition of it, if that was or not. But but there was a big gap between the last one that was published in, I want to say, 1999, and then the late 2000s edition, or 2015, somewhere around there.
But it was produced by the same staff, and it was including all the original actors, except for
so
Walter
the voices.
Koenig.
Except for Chekhov.
Yes, except for Chekhov.
Next time on the podcast.
So I was writing the help pages, the boilerplates.
Yeah, and then came me. I remember you trying to stop me editing.
Was just exactly what you were doing, Jan, is that you see this project and you think, oh, I don't have to do it all myself. Wikipedia was the first general purpose encyclopedia.
I think the earliest one I found started in 2004 for Warcraft. So I think Memory Alpha might at least one of the first. Let's say that.
To be still, a little bit more, hold on to that and shepherd it to keep it a little bit more focused without all the distracting ads. Yes, would have loved to keep that. But I don't think there was any practical way.
I mean, if you would start it now, obviously it would be hosted in the cloud, some kind of virtual host. And I also remember people like Charles Trotter, who somehow found out everything about background extras and every actor that ever appeared, wrote whole articles about them.